Dobbiamo scorrere, sì, perfetto. Allora, anzitutto ringrazio la professoressa Mollo per l'invito e poi tutti voi che siete qui presenti. Vedo che questo paper si inserisce anche in continuità con altri che sono stati presentati ieri, quello del professor Avila, oggi quello del professor Balzaretti. E quindi ecco, vediamo il movimento delle mani, ma in senso violento. I will present in English, okay? Hand movements are among the most expressive of the body. And in fact, one of the ways through which human beings manifest their feelings is by using their hands. Italians are also said to talk with their hands. The outburst of anger or mockery can be conveyed through beatings and especially through the slap, delivered with violence on the face, which is the most noble, exposed, and vulnerable part of the body. Thus, a man humiliates the other man and induces him or her, at least intentionally, to assume a subordinate position. Translations of the denominative verb rapizo, I beat, I slap, in the Latin versions of the Greek Bible, reflecting the effort to express the vividness of the action performed, allow us to trace a small part of the history of the Vetus Latina texts handed down from Africa to Europe through the study of the revision of the Latin equivalents used. The synthetic renderings of rapizzo, expalmare, palmare, and alapizzare, to slap with a full hand, are distinctive of the Old African and Donatist versions. Some of these verbs are proper linguistic innovations and neologism of Christian Latin. They are extremely concrete and physical and belong to a low and popular register of language. Later, they were replaced in African and European revisions by periphrastic forms containing a full verb, for example, verberare, palmis, alapis, cedere, or a support light verb, dare palmas or dare alapas. The synthetic rendering percutio without complements is found only in Jerome. Compared to the previous one, this rendering is much more generic because it does not specify the instrument with which one strikes the hand, and sometimes not even the place struck, the cheek of another person. This reconceptualization probably was meant to eliminate forms felt to be too popular or improper, diastratic or diaphasic variation, yielding more literary versions. This paper focuses on the synthetic forms expalmare, palmare, and alapizzare in the Latin Bible and aims to argue that these linguistic innovations in African Latin belonged to a popular register in light of examples from extra-biblical literature. As a corollary to the study of synthetic forms, the paper investigates their revision, which occurs in two distinct directions, either through the use of analytic periphrastic forms in the Vetus Latina versions, or by resorting to different synthetic forms in the Vulgate of Jerome, percutio, instead of palmo, expalmo. While in all cases, the lexical revision is best explained by diastrati, diaphagy, linguistic register, and is less related to other social linguistic variations, for example, diatopy, Africa versus Europe, and diachrony, linguistic change. In Jerome, it also reflects the semantic ambivalence of the verb rapizzo, from rapis, which means stick, rod, which accordingly to the etymology indicates a strike given with a rod or the like, and not primarily a slap delivered with the palm of the hand. This, the spread of Latin, Vetus Latina versions, but it is very schematic. So let's go on. The verb rapizzo, this is the entry of the little scotch-ons, stems from the noun rapizzo, road, with the addition of the suffix izzo, likewise rabdizzo, for example, from rabdos. Syntactically, it is a transitive verb, so the object is the person concerned, Regarding its lexical formation, it is a denominal verb classified as verbum instrumentativum, since the noun rapis designates the means or instrument with which the action is done. Since one usually strikes someone with a rod, the original meaning of the verb, occurring mainly in classical usage, is to strike with a club, a rod, or related instruments. In the Greek of the Septuagint and the New Testament, there is a semantic shift, probably due to a blurred connection with the lexical basis rapis, towards the meaning to strike with a slap in the face. In the Septuagint, the verb rapizo occurs in Judges, in Codex Vaticanus, in Hosea, in the apocryphal book First Esdras, and on the other hand, the phrase patasso, epitensiagona, is found in First Kings and in the parallel passages of Second Chronicles, and conveys exactly the same meaning of rapizo, with which it was paraphrased by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus in the account of the episode. In the New Testament, the only two occurrences of the verb are in Matthew's Gospel. The verb rapizo and the noun rapisma occur either in a setting of explicit mockery and ridicule, or in the context of a trial to express contempt or punishment of the accused. Latin synthetic forms of the for the rendering of rapizo in the Vetus Latina are found only in First Esdras 4:30, 1 Kings 22:24, and Matthew 5:39, respectively an apocryphal, an Old Testament, and a New Testament book. So we see these renderings from the last one. You have also these examples in your handout, so we will comment the verbs, the renditions afterwards. Just look at the sentences and the translations. In Matthew, we have the verb rapizo, which is translated in the Vetus Latina in the Codex Bobiensis with expalmo. And then here, Jerome gives us percutio. This is a Codex Bobiensis, okay. Then First Kings, again, pataxo epitensiagona on the cheek, and the translation and the Vulgate of Jerome is again with percutio, but there is an ancient Donatist text, 2nd, 5th century, which translates with palmo. Micah was palmatus. And then First Esdras, again, rapizo in a context of mockery. Palmis cedo in the Vulgate, but we know that Jerome didn't translate this text, so it is a Vetus Latina text entered Vulgate. And then a quotation from Donatist environment, which says alapizzo. Quindi in the three passages presented, rapizo is translated into Latin with these three synthetic forms: expalmo in Matthew, palmo, 1 Kings, alapizzo, 1 Esdras. All three texts featuring these forms are African. The translation of Matthew 5:39 is preserved in the oldest Oncial Gospel we possess, the Codex Bobiensis, from the 4th century, containing an ancient African text, first half of the 3rd century. The other two quotations are in texts of Donatist provenance, we said between the 2nd and the 5th century. With the exception of palmo, the African translation coined new lexemes, which were soon to be felt as unusual or incorrect, especially in contexts differing from those in which they arose. Palmo and expalmo are the nominal verbs from palma, which is the palm of the hand, while alapizzo comes from alapa, which is the slap. And so these verbs are built starting from nouns. Let's look at the synthetic renderings one by one. So we said rapizo is expalmo in Codex Bobiensis, This is an apax legomenon. It is later used by Augustine when he cites this text, but we have a similar verb in Olus Gellius, again an apax legomenon, de palmo, used in the Attic Nights. We are in the 2nd century AD. This denominative form is paralleled with the analytical manus palma verberare and occurs in a context of mockery of the legislation of the 12 tables, in which the popular register of language is evident. Then we have the Donatist allusion to the episode of Micah of 1 Kings. And here we find the simple verb palmare, which lacks the complement in maxillam, since it semantically already conveys the information that would be specified with this by this complement. Only one another occurrence of palmo is found in Latin literature in Pseudo-Quintilian. We are in the 2nd century AD, probably, we don't know with certainty. In this case, the meaning of palmo is not to slap, but rather to smear, to imprint the trace of the palm of the hand. Pseudo-Quintilian's quotation is interesting because it illustrates what was meant in current usage by the verb palmare, that is, to unfold the whole hand and diligently imprint all the fingers with a very popular and colorful character. Moreover, this quotation is plausibly dated to the 2nd century AD, to which period the Donatist use of the verb palmare can be traced. And then we have first Esdras. This is, again, an apax. Only Jerome will use again this verb, citing in the context of the trial of Jesus, but we have a similar occurrence in the Acta of the Passionis of Perpetua and Felicity. No, not ṟαπίζω, but exalapo. And the author says that the saints were slapped before being imprisoned. They were exalapatas. Again, a very popular form, and again, a denominative verb from alapa. So let's try to see how these verbs were revised. The 3 synthetic renderings with expalmo, palmo, and ṟαπίζω are isolated to the Vetus Latina translation presented, at least to my knowledge. Generally, in direct and indirect witnesses, alternative renderings of ṟαπίζω are preferred to these synthetic forms. We saw that in 1st Esdra, the Vetus Latina text entered the Vulgate as palmis cedere, so a periphrastic form with palma. Then that this was a revision could be confirmed by the fact that in the Acta Passionis Perpetua et Felicitatis, there are 2 versions of this document. The first one, which is older, has exalapatas. In the second one, the second passage has alapis cedi, so a periphrasis to avoid the use of exalapo, which probably was felt not to be a little bit incorrect. Alternative, there are also other possibilities. Alternative to the synthetic forms are also palmis verberare, frequently found in Cyprian and Lactantius, and the support verb renderings dare palmas or dare alapas. These periphrastic renderings are a conceptual elaboration of the synthetic form and not necessarily later forms. This is important to know. Once again, diastratic can plausibly explain the preferential use of periphrastic forms at the expense of synthetic and innovative ones. The latter, in fact, could have been unusual outside the milieu in which they were created. Moreover, they were used in very few biblical passages, and this certainly did not help their spread. If we look lastly at the translation of Jerome's, in 2 cases, we have percutio instead of palmo, alapo, ṟαπίζω, and so on. Von Soden noted the use of different equivalents in the Latin translations of Matthew 5:39 and deemed expalmo an African form and percutio a European form. In my opinion, it can be assumed that Jerome intended the rendering with percutio to reproduce the semantic ambiguity of the verb ṟαπίζω, which etymologically meant to strike with a rod or any other instrument, and not necessarily to slap, as noted at the beginning of the study. If it is so, the use of percutio instead of expalmo does not correspond so much to a diatopic feature as to a diastratic difference, higher register of language, combined with a greater etymologizing fidelity of Jerome to the original Greek text. At this point, we can see the conclusions. Ancient African and Donatist translation, notoriously archaic, are the only ones to feature the synthetic denominal verbs ecpalmo, expalmo, and alapizzo in translations of ṟαπίζω or occasionally patasso. More common are periphrastic renderings with full verb and instrumental ablative, so palmis or alapis cedo or verbero, or with support verb, dare palmas, dare alapas. While synthetic forms generally represent lexical innovation of African Latin, the nominal verbs resulting from conversion of the noun from which they were formed, so palma or alapa, periphrastic constructs are intended to avoid or correct translations that were considered too lively or popular. Therefore, they are not related to diatopic or even diachronic variation, but to diastrati, as their use in Cyprian demonstrates. The synthetic form percutio in Matthew 5:39 in the Vulgate, on the one hand, represents a diastratic variation of higher register, as the reference to the act is more abstract. It is moreover faithful to the etymology of the verb ṟαπίζω. The examples presented show that in the study of the Latin translations of the Bible, it is methodologically important to avoid simplistic and dichotomous classification, African versus European, ancient versus late or recent equivalents, and so on. An appropriate methodology must take into account the cultural context, extra-biblical recurrences, the polysemy of the Greek lexemes that are translated, source language interference, so in this case, the possible influence of Greek periphrastic forms with ṟάπισμα, for example, on Latin periphrastic renderings with palma or alapa, and above all, variations related to diastrati and diaphagy. In a linguistic study, such methodological insights necessarily precede the analysis of diatopic variation and diachronic change. Thank you very much.